Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third of 4 webinars in ISAP's Ecosystem Market Summer Series. I'm so grateful for the time you took out of work and farming schedules to join us today as we explore the bigger picture of carbon and ecosystem markets. We have 3 prominent players in the grain buying and processing world, and I'm really looking forward to hearing their perspectives on where these markets are headed. But first, let me introduce myself and others who are making this whole series possible. I am Jean Brokish, the Midwest Program Manager for American Farmland Trust, and I am joined by my trusted and wise co-host, Dr. Emily Bruner, the Midwest Science Director. And we are also joined by Beth Frazier, American Farmland Trust National Agricultural Land Network Manager, who is assisting us with technical support during today's webinar, as well as through this whole series. Many of you probably recognize the No Farms, No Food bumper sticker, which is one of American Farmland Trust flagship products there. As a national nonprofit organization, our mission is to save the land that sustains us by protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land. American Farmland Trust works closely with conservation and agriculture commodity groups through the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership, often referred to as ISAP. American Farmland Trust is a founding member of ISAP, which includes 13 organizations collaborating to really accelerate the adoption of conservation practices that improve soil health and reduce nutrient loss. For this webinar series, I'd like to specifically thank some of the members of ISAP that helped in planning and promotions, the Illinois Corn Growers, Illinois Soybean Association, University of Illinois Extension, Agricultural Drainage Management Coalition, and the Nature Conservancy. And another special shout out to Megan Baskerville from the Nature Conservancy, who once again is running our slide deck. Thank you, Megan. Also, thanks to partner organizations in nearby states that have helped plan and recruit presenters and really develop content for this whole series. We've benefited from their collaboration and support and appreciate their time in making this series successful. And as I've already noted, we appreciate the time you all took out of work and farming schedules to join us today. And the series was really developed to provide information and attempt to answer some of the many questions on ecosystem markets. And to that end, once again, we have reserved the last half of today's webinar for Q&A with our presenters. So just encourage you to let us know what you want to know by using the question bar. You can ask questions that come to you at any time during today's webinar, and you can also use that question bar to alert staff of any tech issues you might be having. And then, of course, the last shout out with gratitude goes to today's presenters who have worked with us to develop presentations that address some of the questions we've been hearing from farmers and farm advisors regarding the longevity and legitimacy of some of these markets. Today, today we're joined by 3 prominent players in the grain buying and processing fields. We have Ryan Cerulli from Cargill, Steve Rosenzweig from General Mills, and Megan Ryan from PepsiCo. And I'll be introducing and sharing more information about each of today's presenters. But first, I'm going to pass it over to Emily to help set the stage for us.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you again to everyone for joining us today. I'd like to briefly introduce ISAP's vision for this webinar series, highlighting our 3 major objectives, which are to engage farmers, ag retailers, and advisors and other professionals in the exploration of ecosystem market opportunities, provide transparent and accessible information on market incentives, and increase confidence among farmers in evaluating new programs. We'd also like to point out that we're not endorsing these programs or companies, nor are we promoting one opportunity over another. We merely want to facilitate data sharing among our farmer networks to help folks make their own decisions about what may or may not be right for their own farms. Next slide, please. So we've been overwhelmed with the level of interest and support we've received in organizing this webinar series, and we want to express our gratitude to all our partners, as well as the featured presenters for their time and effort behind the scenes to ensure that this webinar is as informative as possible. We launched our series in February, bringing NORI, Indigo Ag, the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund, and ESMC to one table to provide farmers a side-by-side comparison of market opportunities. Our summer series started in June, detailing carbon programs available from Bayer, Corteva, and Nutrien, and exploring innovative markets and data platforms available from SIBO, Gradable by Farmers Business Network, and Truterra. Today, we will be examining ecosystem market opportunities through the lens of grain buyers and consumer packaged good companies, and we invite you to join us again on Thursday as we round out our series highlighting water quality markets and additional potential revenue streams for ecosystem services. We'll also be joined on Thursday by Arkansas farmer Jim Whitaker, and he'll give us some details on his experiences as both a farmer and a carbon market developer. Next slide, please. So recordings of our previous webinars, along with the fact sheets summarizing programs and platforms featured, can be found at the link provided in the chat. These fact sheets also highlight several tools and reports that can serve as a great starting point for anyone interested in digging deeper into quantifying outcomes of conservation practice implementation. Additionally, I just want to go ahead and put on everyone's radar that we're working to compile all the information and summary tables from this series alongside key decision support criteria and important considerations in a succinct resource document, and we anticipate developing slide decks for shared use by our conservation partners. So I encourage anyone who's interested in contributing to these efforts to please contact Jean or myself so we can be as inclusive as possible in sharing a common message around these opportunities and practices. Next slide, please. So our goal for today and Thursday is to move the conversation beyond carbon and help provide an outlook on how ecosystem market opportunities are expected to expand and scale over the next 10 to 20 years. We've asked each of today's presenters to follow a similar format, starting with an overview of their U.S. sustainability goals and strategies, and then focusing on current and future commitments to increase soil health and the adoption of regenerative ag practices, providing specific examples of pilot programs and scalable partnerships across the Midwest. Each presenter will have roughly 12 minutes to walk us through their presentations, and we'll save the remaining 30 to 40 minutes for Q&A. Let's get started. Back to you, Jean.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, our first market spotlight is Cargill, and we're joined by Ryan Ciroli, the Global Row Crop Sustainability Director. His role at Cargill, he's responsible for leading strategy development and implementation of row crop sustainability programs and initiatives across all of Cargill's enterprises, and his focus areas include optimizing farmer productivity and prosperity while lessening impact on water and climate through adoption of soil health practices and supply chain alignment. Ryan has spent his entire career working along the food and agriculture value chain, and his experiences range from managing a row crop and beef operation in Maryland to creating supply chain solutions between dairy producers, growers, and consumer packaged goods companies, which is often referred to as CPGs. So if you hear that acronym tossed around, we're referring to consumer packaged goods. Ryan holds a BS in animal science from Virginia Tech and an MS in economics from the University of Delaware. And I will pass it over to you, Ryan. I know you've presented before for ISAP, so I appreciate you joining us again today.
Thanks, Gina, and really appreciate the invite and the opportunity to be here today. Just going to offer a perspective, right, from the Cargill lens of really why we're investing in regenerative agriculture, ecosystem service markets, and other programs. A bit of kind of the how behind it and kind of what's driving us, and hopefully we can shed a little light on that. So next, I'm going to be coming at this probably through the lens of where Cargill sits in the value chain. And it's somewhat unique because on one hand, we have this really important relationship and interaction with farmers. and it's critical for who we are and what we do, whether it's buying grains or livestock from farmers, or whether it's supplying feed, services, inputs, things like that as well. And so those relationships and that partnership and that interaction is so critical to what we do. And so when we talk about regenerative agriculture, we talk about different sustainability programs, we're always coming at it through the lens of what does it mean for the farmer, right? What's that experience? Is there value? What are the implications for those programs? And so that's always our starting point. But as critical is the relationships we have on the other end of the value chain, right? So for our customers and such as some of my peers that are going to be coming next, whether it's delivering those finished goods or services to food service customers, to retail customers, to consumer packaged goods customers, and in the industrial segment, we're also trying to identify, beyond the physical products or services that they take from us, how are we helping them address their goals, right? And where is there aligned and mutual interest, really from farmer to end use customer, that we can all achieve, those goals that we're looking for. Next, please. Cargill has a number of corporate responsibility and sustainability commitments. But when we kind of hone in and think about the role of regenerative agriculture or why we're investing there, and supporting things like ecosystem service markets, there's really three of our corporate commitments that we're looking to address, right, or make progress against those goals. And those are around water resources. So how we're advancing and meeting our science-based goals for around water quality, water availability, and water stress regions, around climate. And so how are we reducing emissions within and across our supply chains? So also known as our Scope 3 science-based target, and how we achieve our goal of reducing those emissions by 30% by 2030. And then also the role of the goals around farmer livelihoods and how we're providing that training, that support, that things like agronomic assistance, and improving market access for farmers around the world, also by 2030. And so whenever we're looking at those targets, those goals, those programs, we're also trying to figure out how do we advance against multiple objectives at the same time. Next, please. We've really, put a tremendous focus towards regenerative agriculture over the last, in particular over the last year, to the point where last fall we set a commitment to support farmer-led efforts to advance regenerative agriculture on 10 million acres of North American farmland by 2030. And so over the next 9 years, how do we really scale up and support those efforts? And when we're talking about regenerative agriculture, for us, the core of that, right? The base of regenerative agriculture stemming from those 5 soil health principles. So, keeping the soil covered, reducing or eliminating tillage, keeping living growing roots in the soil, more diverse crop rotations, and integrating livestock. That's the foundation, right? And so everything that we look at is going to start with how do we advance those soil health principles and soil health management systems. In addition to that, right? So when you start with soil health, we're also looking at how do you look at things like 4R nutrient management? And when we're talking about nutrient management, we can advance benefits around water quality. We can also look at emissions reductions. And so it's really a complementary or additive piece on top of the soil health principles. And we're also very much interested in looking at advancing irrigation efficiency and technology. We have some pretty robust water goals. And so if you think about where we operate in water stress region, and if we can be recharging aquifers and looking at water availability, those are really important areas too. So it's really about starting with soil health but also focusing on the nutrient management and irrigation. If we can advance regenerative agriculture, then we can start to think about how we're delivering against those goals, right? And showing real impact on those outcomes related to climate. So for us, that's about insetting, right? Or reducing the emissions within our own supply chains, really starting with the farms in large part. And this helps us advance against our Scope 3 science-based target. And we can look at how we're reducing emissions, as well as how are we sequestering carbon in those systems. We can advance against water resources. So we know we can drive towards improving water quality, water restoration as critical elements towards our goals. And then also moving towards those farmer livelihood goals. So are we providing that right, agronomic support, soil health management system support, and thinking about things, how do we create new market opportunities or new market access while addressing the economic side of for farmers as well. So it's really about stacking these benefits together and advancing the whole. Next, please. But the other big part of why do we care, why regen ag? And we see these benefits for climate, for the broader environment, and for farmers. We supported a 2-year study in partnership with the Soil Health Institute, where SHI surveyed 100 farmers across 9 states in the Corn Belt and identified farmers that have adopted soil health management systems for at least 5 years, so many of them longer. So we could get a sense of what are the economics around soil health, around regenerative ag, and what are some of those benefits that you can experience. And it was really interesting to see that, farmers told SHI that, almost all of them saw, increased crop resilience, right? As we think about drought, flooding. They saw improvements in net farm income for corn and soy production systems. Many of them saw higher yields versus their conventional systems over time. And as a result, you were able to see that there was both reduced costs, those cost reductions, and where those farmers saw yield benefits, you saw these really nice incremental increases in net farm income, right? And specifically, more than $50 an acre for corn and $45 an acre for soybeans. And in the end, this is what we're trying to get to, right? Is we can be looking at programs or even ecosystem service markets where there's incentives and payments that are very valuable and they're really important to help de-risk adoption. But I think the real prize is longer term driving towards that increased resiliency on farms and absolutely the stronger economic opportunity through these systems. And that's really where we're focused on long term. Next, please. So as you think about how we're going to advance regenerative agriculture, right, and soil health management systems, we're doing that through really a portfolio of programs. So not a one size fits all, not a single program or single platform, but rather everything from investing in market-based ecosystem service programs to practice-based programs. And I'll share a few examples of the types of things we're supporting. But in the end, regardless of whether it's practice-based or outcomes-based, we want to get to those outcomes, right? We want to be able to understand the impact on advancing against those scope 3 reductions, around those context-based water goals, and around our land-based regenerative ag goals. So really about moving all of those forward. And whatever program we support needs to be farmer-centric. And so as a grower, we want to, whether you're new to this or whether you've been doing this for 20 years, we want to think about how can we bring that flexibility or bringing programs that you're interested in participating in, right, that help you advance regardless of where your starting point is. Next, please. So just a few examples of the types of programs we've been involved in. So Megan will be talking more about kind of where Pepsi's journey, but PepsiCo and Practical Farmers of Iowa have been just awesome partners. And one of the longest running programs that we've had has been in Iowa and also another in Nebraska, where we've engaged in cost sharing programs on cover crops with farmers. So to cost share on up to 200 acres of cover crops for farmers looking to get started, right? Or farmers that are really interested in the cover crop side of things, and how do we help take some of that risk, right? Or how do we help them get started in this space or expand acres as they've looked to engage there. It's been a very popular type of program and one that we continue to support. In addition to that, Practical Farmers of Iowa has brought that agronomic consultation and support to help farmers as they've, try to understand, getting started with cover crops or the types of mixes or the termination or fertilization. And so again, kind of that key component of the how and the financial support to do that. Next, please. We've also more recently really been excited about supporting the development and of the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund. And so last year we engaged in a pilot program to get started in Iowa. And this year we're actively participating in scaling this up to as much as 85,000 acres in the highlighted eligible counties in Iowa. And this has just been an awesome program, and I think one that we've been super happy to be part of and great partners with the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund. And farmers are able to receive anywhere from $25 to $40 an acre of incentive payments, substantially larger than when you're just looking at carbon. And the difference with the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund is there is a carbon premium, and that's Cargill's purchasing those benefits. But the municipalities in Iowa are paying for the water quality improvements around nitrate and phosphorus. And so when you can stack those benefits together, you get a really nice incentive per acre for farmers. And I think it's been an awesome program and one that we're glad to be part of. Next, please. We've also just very recently launched our own U.S. Regenerative Agriculture Program. And this is it's a U.S. program, but it's focused on 6 states to start with. And this is an outcomes-based program. So we're partnering with farmers and incentivizing farmers on essentially on the carbon that they're able to reduce and sequester. Heavily weighted more towards adoption of cover crops and no-till. But it's been we're just getting going on this. And so we started enrollment in June, and that will continue through the middle of September for this first year. Obviously, as we look at how this learns, we'll look at how that program could expand in the future. We've partnered in this case with Regrow. And so when we look at modeling the impact of the carbon changes using their DNDC models, as well as other tools and some customization with Regrow, they've been an awesome partner for us as we've launched this program. Practical Farmers of Iowa, again, is providing some agronomic support. So for farmers who choose to use that, again, awesome partner as you think about engaging in this space. And then we're also working with FarmRaise. So as farmers are looking at potentially understanding what other government or federal programs are out there that they could engage in, such as EQIP or SIG grants, to more easily access what's out there. And so that's been a unique additional partnership. So happy to share more about that program. Next. So ultimately, as we look to the future, I mean, I think we see just a lot of interest, a lot of investment coming into this space, into agriculture. And it's a super exciting time to be in ag, because I think we're starting to really realize this huge opportunity to not only produce, food, fuel, fiber, the physical commodities on farms, but also be able to advance against some of these key and huge challenges that we have on the environmental side. And I think to be able to put them together and to be able to, really set agriculture in a different light is awesome. I do see investment going beyond carbon, right? I think that's where everybody's focused today. But I think like the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund is a great example of, we bring these other benefits, right? We bring these other this other value when we invest in soil health and in regenerative ag. And I think there's going to be new other market opportunities beyond carbon. So if you can stack those benefits and look at biodiversity, if you can look at water quality or water availability, that's key. But I think keeping our eye on the long-term benefits are even bigger, right? So as we invest in regenerative agriculture, can we help farmers realize, a system that is more resilient and a system that is more economically viable in the long run? And I think that's the big goal or the big opportunity. The incentives matter. I think they're helpful, and I think they help us get us there. But I think keeping our eye on the big picture in the long run is also a key opportunity. So with that, I thank you for the opportunity and look forward to entertaining any questions.
Thanks, Ryan. Great information and great setup for kind of the discussion today, as well as the discussion on Thursday, which you'll all hear more about. But really, we're kind of looking beyond carbon and going to explore those water quality credits a little bit more. But for today, our second market spotlight is on General Mills, and we're happy to be joined by Steve Rosenzweig. Steve is a soil scientist at General Mills and leads research and outreach programs across North America to support farmers in implementing those regenerative agricultural practices and to better understand how regenerative systems impact greenhouse gas emissions and soil carbon sequestration, soil health, biodiversity, water quality, and farm economics. The whole picture, Steve. Steve started at General Mills in 2017 after receiving his PhD in soil and crop sciences from Colorado State University. And while at Colorado State University, he researched the effects of crop rotation on soil health, farmer profitability, the sociology of farmer decision-making, and used satellite imagery to map agricultural practices at the landscape scale. So thanks, Steve, for joining us today.
Thanks, Gene. Thanks for inviting me here. I'm happy to be here and talk about General Mills' approach to regenerative ag and our greenhouse gas goals. It's great to follow Ryan because we are so well aligned with Cargill in kind of our perspective and approach and definition of regenerative agriculture and our programs. And so Ryan's really saved me a lot of heavy lifting here. But so you can go to the next slide. First, I'll give a little overview of kind of all of our sustainability pillars, and so those are here. So one is regenerating our planet, and that's largely what I'll be talking about today. But we also have goals to improve food security. We do a lot of food donations and things like that. Protecting our people, so advancing human rights and racial equity, and strengthening our communities where we have business operations. And we have a really high volunteerism rate as a company. So these are kind of all of the aspects at which we approach sustainability. But I'll be focusing mostly on our greenhouse gas goals and regenerative ag goals here today. And I can't give you a specific number for how much we've invested in regenerative ag programs, but I thought I'd give you kind of a total picture of our overall corporate giving over the last year. And you can see that was about $92 million. And we expect that our regenerative ag and greenhouse gas work will only continue to increase over time. So this is really a place of focus for our company, and I'll talk a little bit about why that is. So you can go to the next slide, please. So similarly to Cargill, we have a scope 3, which means our full value chain greenhouse gas goal. So this is a science-based target, and back in 2015, General Mills was actually the first company in any sector to make one of these commitments. And in looking at, so our goal is to reduce our footprint by 30% by 2030. And when we look at the full value chain from farm to fork to landfill, we realize that agriculture is 61% of that greenhouse gas footprint. And this is really where a lot of the opportunity is, obviously, for us to meet this commitment. And thinking about just the things that General Mills does, that 8% in the middle, we make food. That's really all we do. And seeing that the greatest opportunity for sustainability impact is beyond our own operations. This is really where we've begun to get more involved over the last couple of years in agriculture and these different parts of our supply chain. When we set out to make a strategy for reducing these emissions, we talked to farmers who were sequestering carbon, reducing reliance on fertilizers, these things that we ultimately need to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And they were doing what they were calling regenerative agriculture. And you can go to the next slide. And so really we see, similarly to Cargill, we see regenerative ag as this set of principles that can all come together in a system. It's not really a practice-based checklist, but it's really these principles that are adapted to each farmer's unique context that ultimately lead to all of these positive environmental and economic benefits, like Ryan highlighted. So we consider regenerative ag to be the greatest opportunity for meeting our climate goal, but we realize that it can help more than just climate. And that's why we've decided to set a standalone regenerative ag goal. You can go to the next slide. So back in 2019, we committed to advance regenerative ag. Oh, sorry. Actually, this is just to drill down a little bit more into kind of our perspective and goal with regenerative ag. It's really about repairing and enhancing these critical ecosystem processes on farms. This is ultimately what it's about. And so, Ryan mentioned, just to reiterate something that Ryan said, the incentives for getting to these systems are helpful. And I'll talk a little bit about those programs that we have. But this is ultimately what it's about. It's about this resilience and higher functioning of the agricultural system. So this is a picture of, a broken versus a healthy water cycle, but the same thing is true for the nutrient cycle, pest and disease cycle, the carbon and energy cycle. These are the things that we're trying to enhance through regenerative ag. And that's really where that core benefit is. So it's these longer term benefits, like Ryan said, that ultimately is where we believe the prize is, but we are going to be helping to support farmers in getting to these systems. So you can go to the next slide. And so we have, like I mentioned, so regenerative ag is really important for helping us meet the climate goal, but also it helps improve all of these other outcomes. And so this is our definition of regenerative ag. It's a holistic, principles-based approach to farming and ranching that seeks to strengthen ecosystems and community resilience. And we are looking to quantify and measure impact across all of these different outcome areas. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing is figuring out how do we measure these benefits, and how do we help farmers track these things on their farms over time to actually quantify and document these improvements in the ecosystem and their own business, their own bottom line. So this is really our commitment and what we're setting out to do. Next slide. And this is largely where we're working today. So this is a sense of what we buy and where we buy them from each of these priority regions. So this isn't an exhaustive list, but this is really where we're going to be focusing a lot of our efforts over the next 10 plus years, is in these regions to support, mostly these kind of cropping systems that we source from. And in each of these regions, we currently have multiple programs that all have the goal of accelerating adoption of regenerative ag in these regions. And so the goal is to help farmers adopt these systems broadly. It's not really about, for the most part, it's not about creating a segregated supply chain of premium regenerative products at this point in time. Almost all of our programs support farmers that might not even sell into General Mills supply chain, for example. We're just trying to grow this movement broadly while still kind of being focused in these priority regions. Next slide. So I'll give you a sense of some of the different investments and programs that we have underway. And the first is one you might have heard of, which we're calling our Regenerative Ag pilots. And so today we have 24 farmers in Kansas, 9 dairies in Michigan, and 45 farmers in Canada and North Dakota that are all in this program. We launched this back in 2019, and really the goal is to have kind of a holistic set of support for farmers that are moving down this path. So the first step was education. So we partnered with the Soil Health Academy to put on workshops, multiple day workshops that were free to anybody that wanted to come in the area. And I highly recommend checking out this organization. Their website is there, and you can see if there's any academies coming up in your area. But this is a really great event to kind of kick these programs off and just get a lot of momentum, get a solid grounding in the regenerative principles, to hear from local regenerative farmers who are practicing, and hear about kind of what they're doing and what effects they've seen in that area. And then from there, farmers can opt in to receive one-on-one coaching from an understanding ag coach, so a consultant. And typically these are farmers, ranchers, or agronomists who have a lot of experience in regenerative ag and can just sit down at the kitchen table with farmers, wherever they're starting from, whether they're, just, starting from scratch or whether they've been doing these things for a while, and think about how to take that next step on their own farm with their own goals. And the next part is to build community. So a lot of what we know is that farmers learn best from other farmers, and it's a lot more fun when you can, move down this path with others that are trying similar things, and you can learn faster that way. So we support a lot of field days and discussion groups, and WhatsApp texting groups have been really popular, and Facebook groups and things like that to really help just create this community of farmers moving down this path together. The next component of this is all of the research. So we're doing tons of research on every kind of aspect of the ecosystem and the farm business. So each farm in this program has a study field where we're taking soil samples, we're looking at insect biodiversity and birds and water and components of the farm business to see how inputs and yields are changing, to get an understanding of, every farmer starting from a very different place, and they're each kind of going down, doing different things. They're not all adopting the same practices. So we're trying to get a sense of, each of these different transitions, what that economic and environmental impact is. And it's within this kind of program that we're starting to layer on these ecosystem service market payments. And so we're part of the Ecosystem Service Market Consortium, or ESMC, and their website is there. They're a nonprofit that's working to set up a national ecosystem service market by the end of 2022. So I think there's a webinar where ESMC presented previously, but this is really where we're participating in this market. And so we're in the pilot phase for this. And so the 24 farmers in Kansas, we're gearing up to make those first carbon payments to them this summer or later this year. And the Cheney Lake watershed, or the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, in collaboration with some municipalities in the area, are also paying for the water quality credits. So just like Ryan said, we're starting to stack not only the carbon benefits, but stack those with water quality payments to make that a higher incentive. So this is, something, it's just in pilot phase, but we're really looking forward to this opportunity and expanding it further. And I'll talk a little bit more about ecosystem service markets later on and sort of that longer term goal. But you can go to the next slide. Another thing that we're doing a lot of is working with individual county conservation districts to support their programs. So in a lot of cases, these conservation districts have been kind of trying to scrape together funding from year to year. They don't really have long-term agreements with farmers because they can't kind of have that long-term financial commitment. But they have, a great engaged group of farmers in their counties who want to be experimenting with practices like cover crops or no-till or strip-till. And this is really where we see a great opportunity to step in and help provide that longer-term funding for cost share for these programs, and to also provide some additional assistance to that conservation district to help staff up and provide some more of these events like field days and discussion groups and things like that. So we're currently doing this in a bunch of different counties in Minnesota, North Dakota, Oklahoma, and in Canada as well. And then engaging with universities and other research groups to really use these kind of soil health demonstration trials to understand the soil and water and economic impacts as well. Next slide. And lastly, a lot of what you'll see as we work to scale these programs is you won't really see them as General Mills programs. You won't really see our name attached to them necessarily. We're really trying to support this movement broadly. And so a good example of this is where we've just partnered with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, where we're matching federal and local funding to provide cost share and help organizations staff up to get more people that have expertise in regenerative ag that can work with farmers in their area and help them implement these systems. And so we're supporting about 10 different organizations across those states through this recent NIFWIF partnership. And that's something I think will continue just to increase, is just to help to fuel this movement that's really already underway. And also supporting these farmer-led organizations that are also doing similar things. And groups like the Kansas Soil Health Alliance that just we helped get stood up here recently, and the Minnesota Soil Health Coalition, they have great resources for farmers in the state, and they're farmer-led groups, really just trying to build this movement within the state and help farmers have a community to tap into as they're thinking about working on soil health. So we're looking forward to investing more in those sorts of programs moving forward. And lastly, you can go to the last slide here. I wanted just to give you a sense of a little bit about what we're trying to put together through the Ecosystem Service Market Consortium, or ESMC, where, so I mentioned we're working to pay farmers in Kansas through ESMC for those carbon and water quality benefits. And one thing that's really interesting about this market, where we have food and ag companies engaged in these greenhouse gas reduction goals, is we all kind of share the same footprint. So, for example, when we buy grain from Cargill, we both share in the same emissions from that farmer who grew the grain. And so we have this opportunity to collaborate together, and with a retailer maybe that we sell our final product to. So we have this opportunity to collaborate up and down the value chain, to all collaborate with the farmer to pitch in for those ecosystem services. So that's something we're working to put together. There's a lot of work to make that happen, but hopefully that creates a lot of collaboration up and down the value chain to make these markets resilient long term. So thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Interesting to see the overlap between and among the presenters today, as well as of organizations we've heard from the past. Our final market spotlight is on PepsiCo, and we'll hear from Megan Ryan, the Director of Sustainable Agriculture. Megan supports the design and implementation of PepsiCo's sustainable agriculture and sustainable sourcing programs, including engagement and collaboration with key suppliers, and delivery of sustainable sourcing and sustainable agricultural goals for PepsiCo. Prior to joining PepsiCo, Megan led the U.S. supply chain sustainability practice as an associate director at BSR, and she advised leadership companies on the food and beverage industry on innovative approaches to drive impact through supply chain sustainability. And Megan lives on a small diversified vegetable, herb, and hops farm in New York's Hudson Valley. And so thank you, Megan, for joining us today and sharing a little bit more information about PepsiCo.
Thanks so much, Jean, and thanks to the American Farmland Trust team and ISAP for the invitation. I've attended a couple of the summer series webinars and found them to be super informative, so thank you all for putting these on and for inviting me and PepsiCo to share a little bit about our approach. So I'll use this time to start off by sharing a bit about why PepsiCo is engaging in this work and a little bit on the goals that guide our work. And then I'll talk about some of the details of the programs that we've established and invested in the US to support farmer and farm resilience. And really also want to thank my co-presenters who I think have really set the table for my comments and covered a lot of ground in terms of the space. We have a lot of resonance in the approaches that we'll take. So I'll try to draw out some things that are maybe a little bit different or more specific to the way that PepsiCo is engaging in this. I think just to start off, PepsiCo is absolutely an agricultural company at its core. In the US, we source significant quantities of crops like corn and wheat and oats and sugar beets to make the products that you know. Maybe some of these are in your home today, from Doritos and Cheetos to Stacy's Pita Chips, Quaker Oats, Blue Can Pepsi, Gatorade. We've been doing business for about 100 years, and we want to be around for another 100 years. And we know that without successful farmers, we can't exist as a business. We absolutely have a responsibility to use our scale and support a resilient and thriving farm and food system. And we know that this starts with supporting farmers to build resilience, and that means improving soil health, implementing practices that are broadly considered to be part of a regenerative ag system. And we know that all of this is key to our collective success, our success as a business, success of farmers and of supply chain partners and others like my co-panelists. And I think especially today, we recognize an even more urgent need to support farmers as we see more volatile and extreme weather events from a changing climate. And the programs that I'm going to talk about, we see as one way that we can contribute to building that resilience that's so necessary. Next slide, please. And like many big food and beverage companies, and like my co-panelists, we also have ambitious goals that guide our work in agriculture. And I hope also for this audience, demonstrate our commitment to seeing this work through in the short, mid, and long term. These goals, and you see the ag ones on the slide here, they help to really mobilize our over 260,000 associates around the world. They help to provide clarity and excitement, we hope, to our external partners and our commercial partners, and they demonstrate our intentions and our performance to our stakeholders, whether that's our investors, our customers, or our end consumers. And for PepsiCo, agriculture is absolutely central to our overall sustainability commitments. In April of this year, we actually set out these new goals that you see on the slide that are designed to support farmers and create positive impacts in ag across our global value chain. And this work really builds on years of work that we had been doing previously on conservation or sustainable ag and work directly with farmers that are linked directly with PepsiCo. But this is kind of a doubling down on our ambition. So I'll take you through just briefly the key goals that are here, and then we'll talk about how do they inform the work that we are doing in the US and the programs that might be accessible to some of you on the call. So by 2030, we aim to spread regen farming practices across 7 million acres of land globally, so around the world, and that's approximately equal to our entire ag footprint. So it's a big, ambitious goal. It's something that's keeping us up at night, but also motivating us to keep doing this good work and think about scale pathways. And as we do that, we also want farmers to be rightly positioned as part of the solution to climate change. We, like the others on the call, have a really ambitious science-based climate target, and we know that this work in ag is going to help to eliminate several million tons of greenhouse gases from our system by the end of the decade. And additionally, by 2030, we're aiming to improve livelihoods of more than 250,000 people in our ag supply chains and communities, as well as sustainably sourcing 100% of our key ingredients. So how are we doing this in the US? Next slide, please. We are really actively supporting farmer-led adoption of regenerative farming practices across our ag supply chains, and the US has been a really fertile testing ground for us to do this work. You heard a little bit from Ryan earlier about one of the programs that we've had for several years with Cargill. And we've used that as a bit of a blueprint to expand and to think about implementing new programs like that take different shapes and different formats depending on where we implement them. So for the past several years, we've been working alongside a number of industry groups and nonprofits and other food and bev companies and processors to develop and launch these farmer-focused projects that you can see as kind of map points on the slide here. We're actively supporting different types of projects across several states and working with really great implementation partners, folks like Practical Farmers of Iowa or Illinois Corn Growers. We also have a project like Cargill with the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund. Identifying these folks who really understand local farmer needs and have strong relationships with farmers already has been absolutely critical to our ability to scale this work and to be successful. We want this work to provide value to farmers, and as PepsiCo, we may not always have that relationship. We may not always have that expertise to know what works in a given region, but partnering with those who do has been absolutely essential to our success and enabling farmers to really improve their own operations and meet their own goals for their businesses. One of the types of projects that we've supported is a cover crop cost share. So you heard a little bit about this from Ryan, doing something like providing $10 an acre for up to 200 acres or so of cover crops. Last year, we supported farmers to put in 85,000 acres of cover crops under programs like that, as well as implement other practices like reduced tillage or optimized nutrient management. And we've seen really strong results from these types of programs. Improved resilience from farmers to weather volatilities, improvements to soil health, certainly measurable carbon reductions, which supports our science-based goal, and then critically, economic indicators that all of this is working, reducing bills for fertilizer and other inputs that are really meaningful for farmers as they look across their enterprise. And also a sense from farmers that they're protecting their legacy, that this is meaningful to them because it helps them steward their land for future generations. So we feel like we're on the right track. We're still absolutely in learning mode. We love testing and innovating, but our goal for this upcoming year is to expand these programs to impact more than 500,000 acres of farmland across the US. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more detail on the programs that we have for this coming growing season. I'll talk a little bit about what these look like and touch a bit on eligibility criteria and outreach, and then certainly look forward to getting into more detail in the Q&A. So together with our local partners, the way that we approach setting up these programs is starting with what are the barriers and challenges that farmers face, and how can we develop programs and strategies that help to address those local hurdles at different levels of the system. So I mentioned cost share as one element of what we've done. So certainly providing direct incentives to farmers has been one lever that we've used in these programs, and that may be a per acre payment for practices like cover crop, or a payment for quantity of outcomes like our work with the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund. We also, like General Mills and Cargill, have found it to be really important to facilitate access to local agronomic advisors. We have focused quite a bit on strengthening local farmer-to-farmer networks and making sure that farmers have opportunities to learn from each other, to share best practices, to share what didn't work, and to build community locally around this work. We funded some research on soil health and other topics. We're working with financial institutions to do our best to see what we can do to help recognize the resilience benefits of regenerative farming. And we're also working at the policy level to see what we can do to influence policy in ways that are favorable to farmers. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more information on eligibility criteria and data collection, a little bit of the nuts and bolts of our programs. So our programs look different everywhere that they're implemented, but I'd say in broad strokes, the programs that are supported by PepsiCo are typically advertised locally through a grain merchant or a local organization. In some places, our partners might be sending out emails or postcards or advertising opportunities to enroll in a program supported by PepsiCo on the local radio. So those are some places to look out for opportunities that might be available to you locally. And then a little bit on farmer data, because I think this is so critical. By design, PepsiCo doesn't have access to farmer-specific data from our US row crop projects. Our projects are using industry tools like the field print calculator or Comet Farm or the Cool Farm tool. and they involve some soil sampling in some cases. But in all of this, we're trying to ensure that we really minimize the amount of bugging farmers for data and information and maximize the amount of really value-added activities. And our project partners are only sharing with us aggregated information, like the number of acres that were enrolled in a project, or maybe some details on what was the economic impact of changing practice? What was the average cost to farmers who are in a program of implementing a new practice like cover crops, as well as the aggregated environmental metric results like improvements in water quality or reduced greenhouse gas emissions. And seeing those results, they really help us to understand what's working and what can be improved and how we might change our approach to improve the benefits to farmers. So hopefully that gives you a good sense of what's driving PepsiCo's focus on these topics, why we're investing in regenerative ag. We're committed for the long term. Our goals go out to 2030, but we also have some commitments that stretch to 2040 and beyond. And we're really excited about the work that we've done to date, but absolutely looking to the future, and would love to hear more farmer voices in the conversation. We, very open to feedback and input from farmers about what would make this more meaningful, more practical, more efficient, more effective for you. So looking forward to the Q&A, and I'll turn it back to Jean.
Thanks, Megan. And thank you to all of our presenters for sharing information on their corporate sustainability programs. We will shift and use the remaining time today to tackle some of the questions that we received. And just a heads up, we probably won't get to all of the questions today, but we are tracking all of the questions submitted through this webinar as well as the entire series, and we're using that to really help us inform any follow-up resource materials that are developed. So please feel free to submit questions you have using the question bar. And then I'll invite Ryan and Steve to join us with cameras and mics on. And if any of you have attended our previous webinars, you know that there's like some tight ground rules I really like to follow during the Q&A, and the presenters have all been briefed on that, where we'll go like through a rotation, starting with Ryan, then Steve, and then Megan, and each presenter will have about a minute to respond to the questions with the goal of just trying to get through as much information as possible. So our first question goes to Ryan, actually, and I think this is a good one for you, Ryan. Cargill, I think of like as a grain buyer, and when farmers deliver grain to the elevator, they're often accustomed to adhering to quality requirements, be it like % protein or % moisture. Is the addition of environmental sustainability requirements at the point of sale on the horizon? So for example, I'm a farmer, I take my grain to the elevator, and now there's a question or a checked box for whether that grain has been grown on fields utilizing desired practices. So just is Cargill using that, or do you see that on the horizon?
I don't, and we're not using that today, right? So we've really essentially disaggregated the physical that we procure from any voluntary programs that they put out there, right? And so we really are trying to think about this is truly voluntary, and we're really just looking to say, are there, if we offer a program or we offer something, if we have an interest from a customer, really looking to say if growers want to engage, that there's a way for them to do that, but we're not attaching, looking specifically at the physical commodity or the physical grain that they sell to us and requiring anything with it. It's truly disaggregated at this point. So,
how about Steve with General Mills? Is there any type of check like that in your supply chain?
No, and we're even farther away from the farmers than Ryan is. So I think similarly, we don't necessarily care about the practices. It's about the outcomes. There's not one practice that has the same outcome everywhere. That's why at General Mills, we talk about our regenerative ag definition as principles, where that, those principles, farmers can implement hundreds of different practices to actually implement the principles in the right way for their unique context. So having a checklist of practices might ultimately limit flexibility. If we're focused on rewarding farmers for outcomes, they can use their creativity to get to those outcomes. So that's really why we're focused on measuring carbon sequestration, water quality improvements, and giving farmers a lot of flexibility in how they actually get to those outcomes today. So.
Megan?
Yeah, I think similar to Steve, we are not the direct grain buyer. So if something like this were to be implemented, it would have to be one of our upstream partners making the call. But, I think we as CPG companies, we of course have a role to play in sending market signals. And I wouldn't rule out something like this. I think the question is kind of embedded in a broader, big question about how do you value this kind of work? Is it a carbon market? Is it payment for practice? What are the best mechanisms that are going to give us the end results that we're looking for? And I think, if we were to explore something like this, we'd want to give some serious thought to what is valued and the value that's attributed. I think, paying a premium for practices could dilute the overall impact we're trying to support. It could encourage farmers to do some things that may not be beneficial to their operations or their land in the short or the long term. It could encourage people to go till up their land in order to be seen as going reduced till or no till. So I think we just need to be very thoughtful about what it is that these kind of values that are attributed to different things, whether it's practices, outcomes, quantity of carbon, what does it really motivate for the farmer, and making sure that the farmer is at the center of these decisions that are made and these opportunities that are offered.
So would it be possible maybe for each of you to talk just a little bit more, and to some extent you may have touched on this in your presentation, but what protocols or methods are you using to really figure out and hone in on that outcome? And I think, Steve, you're up first on this one.
Sure, yeah, so we, I'd say, when we're paying for an outcome, we're going through ESMC, the Ecosystem Services Market Consortium, and so all of the protocols and methods there are sort of within that group. And so primarily what it is today is there's a soil sample taken at year 1 to really establish that baseline of soil carbon and other kind of soil properties that are needed for modeling things like water quality. And then the farmers are paid annually based on the results of a model output. So there's a model run using the farmers' practices to estimate what's happening to soil carbon. And then there's samples taken every 5 years to kind of make sure that what the model is predicting and what the farmers are being paid on is actually what's happening in the soil. And so that's kind of the protocols that we're using today. And lots of details still to be worked out given it's in the pilot phase, but that's what we're doing.
Megan?
Yeah, we're doing a range of things. Like I mentioned in my presentation, we use industry tools like the field print calculator or Cool Farm tool to do measurements of environmental metrics, and we can use those to proxy out, how much quantity of greenhouse gas was reduced, and think about payments in accordance with that. We also recently became members of ESMC. I think we're not as far along as Steve or Ryan on that journey, but learning, and really impressed so far with the methodology that they've developed, and interested to think about how that plays a role into the way that we, the backbone for our programs, and thinking about the methodologies we would use into the future.
Ryan?
Yep, very similar, right? I mean, I think whether we're engaged in programs with ESMC or some Water Outcomes Fund and the protocols they've chosen, using tools, different models, whether it's DNDC, Comet, Cool Farm tool, we're typically working with. And then there's a question of, depending on what the program is, as Steve mentioned, right, if the need for actual physical sampling comes into it, what does that need to look like? So it does somewhat depend on the program, but I'd say, I think as we're trying to figure out, what's acceptable to meet our science-based targets and other commitments, we make sure that those protocols and those tools are in line.
I think kind of what is also interesting, and maybe this is just kind of a follow-up question that I'll pitch to Megan first. How are you translating those different verification and outcomes to the consumer? How are they being, so essentially, we hear about greenwashing, right? And how are we not greenwashing this? How are you actually monitoring that or using those verification processes and then communicating to consumers how the products they're buying are translating and then working back their way to their farm, working their way back to the farms?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Jean, and one that we're working really actively on. I think we think about external communications, about the why behind this work, and then the performance of what has been accomplished at a few different levels. So we report publicly to a wide range of stakeholders through our sustainability reporting, and so that would be the place where you could find details around the fact that we've cost shared on 85,000 acres of cover crops, some interesting statistics in there about finding 38% net carbon reduction from those projects. So we're reporting publicly through that venue, but we know that not every consumer is probably clicking around on the PepsiCo website and finding that place to understand what it is that we're doing and what goals that we've established. I think we need to think quite differently about how we message this to the consumer, and it's a really active place of work for our brand teams who are getting to know our supply chains in completely new ways. So going out and doing farm visits and really understanding how agriculture is the backbone and the core of our company. We're building that knowledge base so that our brand and marketing experts then are able to communicate that to the consumer. And I think we have had some good examples, not only in the US, but as we look around the world. We have done some really nice features on farmers who are in our programs. We're lucky in our potato supply chain in particular to have a lot of intergenerational growers who have been with us for quite some time and have been part of the PepsiCo or Frito-Lay family for quite a while. So we have been able to provide those kind of features, but I think a new day is dawning, and this will be a great opportunity with our regenerative ag commitments along with others in the industry like Cargill, like General Mills. We're all kind of pulling in the same direction to think about what is going to be meaningful to the consumer. How do we bring them along on this journey and get them excited and activated? How does this differentiate our product, we hope, in the marketplace? And how do we bring the retailers along on this journey as well, who ultimately end up selling our product?
Brian, do you have, from Cargill's perspective?
I mean, so very little of what we do is consumer facing, right? Just because of where we are. And so ultimately it's quite often it's what are those, how do we enable, General Mills and PepsiCo and other customers to help them, if they need to communicate to the consumer, or do we have the right, how are we helping them translate the work that we do or the projects that we're involved to be able to make, to be able to get there? I think more generally for us, it is just about showing progress towards our goals and making sure that whether it's our annual sustainability or annual reporting or other areas that we report, that there's enough rigor and robustness behind, the quantification of, effort towards our science-based targets as an example, or our context-based water goals. So how we're capturing that and how we're reporting against it would be the key areas for us. But quite often, how are we enabling and understanding what potentially our consumer-facing customers, what kind of needs do they have to be able to help translate that?
Mm-hmm. Steve.
Yeah, really similar to Megan. I think we're on a journey with consumers, with our brands, to figure out how to connect this work in a meaningful way to each unique consumer. Because there's not just sort of one kind of consumer. There's really lots of different types that are all interested in very different things. And what's the sort of the way in to help this work resonate with them is sort of the journey that our brands are on. So today, we're not doing a lot of consumer-facing messaging. On pack, for example, we've tried a few things here and there where we've really identity preserved ingredients from a few farmers that we've taken measurements on and really worked with, and translated all of that onto the box that the consumer sees at the end of the day. And I think that's a great learning process. I think we still have to figure out how to make this work resonate with them, so that they're not only commenting on how great the product tastes, but also how interesting the story is about the farmers and the environmental impact that they're able to create. Yeah, it's a process, and I think that's one where I'm really excited to see where that goes, because yeah, we're not quite there yet with the consumer pull, but hoping to make it happen.
Yeah, and I guess a follow-up question, and maybe we can kind of just start again with Megan on this one, because I think Megan, specifically, you mentioned this, improved farmer livelihoods in your as one of your goals, and so just kind of curious, sustainability, and many corporations and societies kind of approaching this from multiple angles, and so how are metrics such as improved farmer livelihoods and the human right commitments, how are those being measured?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I would say so. We've zoomed in today to talk about our U.S. programs, but the goals that we've established, including our goal around livelihoods, is a global goal. And so when we think about that goal, there is absolutely applicability right here at home in the U.S., but we're also thinking about vulnerable populations in supply chains like our palm oil supply chain or cane sugar, or some of our really small potato growers in India, where we've established programs for many years that are focusing on farmer livelihoods, whether that's technical support or financial literacy training, or an emphasis on women's economic empowerment and ensuring that women have similar access to resources and training and ability to make decisions on the farm as men do. So our work in livelihoods is rooted in that really global take on what it means to support farmer livelihoods. But I think absolutely here at home, the work that we're doing around economic viability of regenerative agriculture and making sure that it's absolutely part and parcel to any kind of program that we'd offer or investment that we'd support, that it needs to make financial sense to the farmer. And if it doesn't in year 1 or 2 or 3, like we've seen with cover crops, where sometimes there can be a yield drag, what can we do to de-risk that practice in those early years to make sure that farmers can get over that hurdle and get to a place where it is something that is economically viable, profitable, productive for their farm? So we're thinking about it globally, but tailoring the work locally, and that's some of the work that we've been doing in the US with our cost share programs. But I'm sure we'll be doing much more over the coming years. We only announced that goal in April, and we've been working behind the scenes to develop a really robust framework informed by external stakeholders and nonprofits on how we measure it, how we're going to communicate on it into the future.
Ryan, how about Cargill's kind of non-soil, non-crop related, sustainability goals, be them human rights or farmer livelihood?
Sure. I mean, being a global company, right? I mean, we touch so many different aspects. When you think about the farmer livelihood, similar to what as Megan talked about, if you think about the different challenges we have in different parts of the world, how do you, whether it's again standing up, developing or helping supporting farmers in regions, whether it's women's empowerment or whether it's other just access to training and understanding, agricultural best practices, right? How do we improve the livelihoods, i.e. productivity, right? And helping raise farmers up out of poverty where we can. Also thinking about, so the training aspects, right? And the technical support and the tools and the necessary elements to help advance ag. But also market access is a key thing for us too, is having a point of ways for farmers to be able to market or sell their crops, right? Or access new market opportunities are critical. So it's beyond potentially even your own use or what's in your local market, but when you can create new opportunities and new pool, it leads to that. So globally, those are big areas we look at, and obviously as we think about from a North American or U.S. perspective, as we're supporting things like understanding the economics behind regenerative ag, behind soil health management systems, where's that agronomic and technical support? And then again, as we think about market access, the rise of ecosystem service markets, and how can we support the development of those to make sure that farmers can easily access and understand how to participate in those markets should they choose to. So,
Steve?
Yeah, similarly, we have strong global programs to support smallholder farmer livelihoods, and mostly our regenerative ag work is focused on North America. And when we're talking about like farmer economic resilience, a lot of that does come down to the business case for regenerative ag for farmers and proving out that business case. So, similar economic research to what Ryan showed, where they're working with Soil Health Institute, we're really trying to document what changes in the farm business as farmers are implementing these principles. Reduction of inputs, sometimes increases in yields, definitely increases in yield stability over time, less risk to extreme weather that can really affect farmer livelihoods. And so those are sorts of the things that we're trying to get a better handle on measuring and also measuring at scale. And so a lot of the work that we're doing across all of our outcomes, not just farm economics, but things like biodiversity and greenhouse gases, is investing in the tools and technologies to be able to track those sorts of impact at the scale of millions of acres, so that we can, understand our real impacts in these supply sheds that we call them, these broad regions that we draw these ingredients from. So lots of satellite imagery to understand risks to extreme weather and work like that underway.
So each of you kind of touched on, the economic and Megan, I think you used the word yield drag, just kind of recognizing sometimes there is, as we shift and kind of learn a new management, farmers may be reducing yield. So a question that came in from the audience really is like, how do we, as the agriculture and food industry, how do we really address the problem that farmers are seeing, where it's kind of like a chicken and egg thing, where we want to do these practices, but there's going to be a yield hit or potentially reduced income, potentially increased expenses, at least until we dial in and really start seeing improvements in the resilience factor. So just kind of curious how your company recognizes that, or what the thought is there in terms of how to support farmers through that transition. And I think we're back to Ryan on this one. Not an easy question for you, Ryan.
No, but I think it's, we know every farm is different, right? Every region is different. We have so many different factors at play when you're talking about climate and soil types and, the amount of moisture you receive from year to year. There's so many variables. And so to just say it's one size fits all and it's really simple it's bogus, right? We know this is complicated. We know that this isn't easy. And so for us, I think we're not core in agronomy, right? This isn't, we buy grain. And so making sure that we have the right technical support in place and the right partners in place who can help, right? So obviously farmers may turn to their, long-term trusted advisors and agronomists to say, help me through this. But if they're looking for additional resources and support, do we have the likes of a PFI, right? A Practical Farmers of Iowa, or a PCM, the Precision Conservation Management, right? Great TNC, great organizations out there that can help. And if you need assistance, can we turn to them to say, on my farm, where do I start? Or here's what I'm comfortable doing. And are the resources there? And I think that's the starting point. And then part of it too is just, can you step in and learn, right? Are you willing to take maybe a small place to start with? And I think a lot of our programs have started there to say, just get introduced to it, right? We're not saying, bet the entire farm all in once, right? And make a huge change, but really get started to where you're comfortable making that start. And then do we have the right support in place to say, here's how we can help you make that decision and learn from it and work through it. And today that's, pretty much the best that we can offer as the industry kind of evolves and gets focused in this area.
Steve?
Yeah, totally agree. It's context specific. A lot of what I think some of those early struggles can be is just figuring out what works for your farm, for your unique system, because adapting a practice from somewhere else might not work for you, and there might be failures in those first couple of years. And so a lot of what we've tried to do is to accelerate that pace of learning. And a lot of our partners are folks like Gabe Brown and these other people that kind of were trying to mostly figuring out how to do it on their own farm, just through trial and error without a lot of support. And what they're saying now is, what it took us 15 years to do, we can help other farmers do in 3 years. Mm-hmm. And so it's really, connecting farmers to those people that have expertise in their area is really how you just accelerate that process of getting to that more profitable, resilient system faster without having to make all these pitfalls, especially when you have a network of a couple dozen other farmers in your area that are doing it, along with you and trying out things. Like, instead of just having one experiment on your farm, now you have, 24 times however many fields they're doing it on that you can learn with. And so really we're trying to connect those informational resources, but also stepping in with cost share and things like that, where it's really needed to help farmers take that economic risk, because it is a big ask, especially for farmers that are just trying to get to the next year. Mm-hmm. So how do we enable that experimentation is really where we focused.
Megan, anything to add from PepsiCo's perspective?
I think Ryan and Steve covered it beautifully. It's hyper local, it's farm by farm, it's season by season. Importance of technical support, building networks of farmers to share best practice, making sure that those practices are both informed by research and also by local experience. There could be a group of farmers who tried something and failed, and that's really important knowledge to share with others who are looking at this. And I think Ryan's point as well around starting small. I think we found that to be key in our programs, where we're typically, if it's a cost share program, doing it, for 200 acres, and we'll see, farmers who say, I'll, put my back 40 into this, and I'll try that out, or I'll, and I think that kind of approach of saying, let me do a little farm experiment on my own operation can be a really useful way to get started, and then making sure that those learnings are cascaded through that network, and shared out with other farmers, so that, as you've mentioned, we can either fail faster or accelerate what's working and make that go even faster.
Yeah, so each of you mentioned kind of working with local partners, and most of you have, actually mentioned specific partners in your presentation. So how can local soil and water conservation districts, local farmer groups, individual farmers, and even like watershed groups, how can they get more involved with your programs, and or develop pilots of their own? And so I think Steve, I think you're up first on this one here.
Yeah, so I'd say, develop the expertise in regenerative ag, develop proven relationships with farmers in your area, and a strong case that you can help farmers implement these systems. All of the conservation districts or other groups that we're working with today are largely, they're recognized leaders in their area and have, a strong track record of working with farmers on soil health. It's harder for us to kind of start from scratch, with groups that don't really have anything underway. I think where we can be really effective is in helping groups scale up programs. Like, a program that Ryan and I are both supporting is Wilkin County Conservation District in Minnesota. And they've just done a great job of kind of scrapping together funding from year to year to help farmers that are interested try out cover crops. And they have a great technical staff to help them make it happen. And what they were lacking is a long-term kind of economic support to really, have this longer-term journey with these farmers and give them that longer-term engagement. So that's really where we were able to step in, help scale up these programs, help give them that longer-term support, and help them dedicate more staff time to soil health, because they're kind of having to do lots of other things that aren't necessarily aligned with regenerative ag or soil health, just to kind of keep things going there at the conservation district. So this is really where I think we can be effective, is if there's things already happening that we can work to scale up and make bigger. Yeah.
Megan?
Yeah, I would say, we welcome opportunities to explore bringing in more partners that have similar goals, either into our existing programs or into new programs that we look to create. Most commonly, those kinds of connections are made through our local implementation partners, or maybe through our suppliers' local team. Maybe it's, Ryan's local team has a great relationship already with the Soil and Water Conservation District, or has a, good idea of someone that we could tap into from Extension locally. And so those are typically the way that this is happening. It's a lot more organic. We're not going out and doing, a landscape scan and identifying which soil and water conservation districts we want to work with. So maybe we should be doing that. It's been a little bit more word of mouth and through relationships that already exist on the ground. But certainly, we're looking to grow our project significantly. We're interested in trying new things, and would be really happy to hear from groups who see a fit from their work and what we're looking to do. Would be very open to that.
Great. How about you, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I think we try to be really accessible, and whether it's through our local teams or reaching out wherever those connections are, right? And I think as we try to be more visible about the types of programs we're rolling out, where they are, if there's ideas or there's ways to partner in, I think we're always open to expanding or enhancing or building on what we're doing. I think Steve's, a great example at Wilkin County. They're just awesome, and they just reached out to our local teams, formed a connection, and ended up that created an opportunity for, I talked to Steve, and before you know it, and we have multiple partners now working on this super cool project with this awesome conservation district in the Red River Valley, and it's and that's the way it should work, right? I mean, I think those are great examples of just, being open, being receptive, understanding the needs of an area, and then just looking at ways to be collaborative with partners, and if there's projects that come of it, great. They don't always, but I'd say, I think we're increasingly looking at ways that we can support that work. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Let's work with those this is what these conservation districts do every day. And there's some unbelievably talented, great people there. And if we can support them, perfect. That's the way this should work.
So maybe just briefly kind of thinking through working with partners and building capacity among partners, what are some of the biggest obstacles that you've encountered in getting some of these programs off the ground? So whether that's internal within your organization or companies, or whether that is feedback you've heard from farmers or partners on the ground. And I think we'll pitch this one to Megan. I think that's where we are.
Yeah, I would say, we have overall had pretty good success with our projects. Most of them have over-enrolled, and we see good year-to-year farmer retention for our projects, which I think is one of the best testaments that what we're offering is, valuable to folks, and they want to continue with it. And I attribute, most of the reason why is our great local partners. It's committed suppliers like Cargill, who make available their local merchandisers and originators to support on farmer outreach and make data collection a lot less of a pain for farmers than it could be. But I think, there are a few things that, of course, we're looking to improve and thinking about, how can we make this more efficient, more effective? I think one of those is how do we reach farmers that aren't part of the early adopter group for conservation ag practices? Can we learn more about what motivates farmers who are maybe not yet sure that this is for them or that they want to do this at any scale, and really think about what's holding them back. We have a good sense that about some of the things, and we've designed our programs to address those with technical support, with farmer networks, with cost share, but can we be smarter in how our programs are designed and what they offer to offer an even bigger tent for farmers and reach some of that group that might be kind of in the middle, not in the early adopter group. And then I think the other is we of course want this work to be as pre-competitive as it can be, and we actively want to work with our competitors who could be, off-takers of the other crop that's grown in rotation in an area where we're interested in starting a program. And, competing is not going to help anyone. It's certainly not going to help the farmers that we rely on, but there is becoming an aspect of this that's feeling a little bit more competitive, where our programs are now in consideration by farmers side by side with an offering from someone like Indigo or a Nori. And while it's not an active obstacle today, and we're glad for farmers to have choice and have options, and we support that, it's definitely something that we're monitoring. So I think those are two areas that I'm actively thinking about, how do we address these potential hurdles or barriers? How do we move from our early adopter group to maybe those middle adopters? And how do we think about ensuring our programs and our offerings are fit for purpose and valuable as farmers have more choice in the marketplace of what they do and who they work with?
Great, thanks. How about Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, Megan's touched on a lot of really, really key and points that I think she's spot on. I think just what do farmers really want to engage in, right? At the end of the day, all of this, any of the things that we've all laid out today are dependent on a farmer choosing to say, I want to engage, right? I'm going to advance this system. I'm going to take a step or another step, right? I mean, we're not starting from scratch here, right? It's here's where I am on my journey, and I'm willing to continue forward. How do I want to engage with the likes of a Cargill or General Mills or a PepsiCo or whoever else? And I think really trying to get that farmer perspective is actually way harder than you'd think sometimes, right? And I think hence why we have all of these different programs. We're trying a lot of different things to say what works. And again, different regions are different needs are different. But I think understanding what's that unlock that the growers are going, I'm willing to go down that path with you, right? Or I'm already interested in it, and here's how you could support me in that process. And a lot of it comes down to incentives and financial, yes, but what else? Is it farmer networks? Is it other things? What are those things that really can drive that change? So I think that's critical. The other big element that I think is a growing concern or challenge is the burden on this, being able to get to outcomes, right? So everything we're trying to get to is understanding the impact of the programs we have. And I think there can be an undue challenge when you think about measurement, verification, the amount of data required, what it takes to help, how do we make this a better farmer experience, right? How do we make this easier for them to engage in so that we can get to those outcomes? And I think that's another element that we've got to make it easier, right? We've got to make it less burdensome. We've got to make it easier to engage along the way. So,
Steve, anything to add there?
They really hit on the big ones. I mean, it's like, how do you not just preach to the choir kind of within, the farm? Like mostly, I think a lot of our programs are just helping farmers that already see the value in moving down this path just get there faster. But we know the vast majority of farmers aren't trying to move in this direction. And so I think how do we bring them into the tent is a big question, like Megan said. And then to Ryan's point about data, I think a lot of these systems that we're trying to build to get to outcomes are in very early stages, and a lot of this work is manual. I've been on the phone with farmers, like I was on the phone with farmers all winter, just asking them about management practices so I could fill out, put it into the survey so that we can model outcomes. We have to streamline, we have to get these technologies to scale so that farmers don't have to be on the phone with me for like an hour.
Sure.
So I think that's definitely, yeah.
making it easier and cleaner for the farmers. Understood. So I think we have I just want to give you all 30 seconds to just share any final remarks with our audience before we do our wrap up. And I think, Ryan, this one we start with you. So real briefly, parting words.
It's an awesome time to be in agriculture. I think the recognition of the power of ag and how we can do all of the things ag delivers plus solve some of the world's most pressing challenges is freaking awesome. So it's a great time to be in agriculture, and I'm bullish about our future.
Awesome. Steve.
Yeah, I would say if you're kind of in an area where you feel like I don't see any of these resources that you're talking about, I don't know who to go to for these things. And if you actually believe there are none in your area, reach out to one of us or reach out to your conservation district and tell them to get a hold of us, or start something yourself. I think we've seen a lot of cases where an independent agronomist or a farmer themselves has been the catalyst for all of this momentum in their area. And so if it's really not there, I think, starting this and creating something that's collaborative with other farmers, other groups, is the key to kind of really getting a lot of this momentum going in your area. So, yeah.
Thanks. Megan, last word to you.
Yeah, I think building on what both Ryan and Steve said, I think this is such an exciting time. We really want to support farmers to be part of the solution to, whether it's climate change or how do we feed the world. And I think this is a moment where I feel like we're in a transition period where, at least when we hear from our farmers, like the ones at Frito-Lay that I mentioned that have been in our system for a long time, there's a sense that they've been misunderstood, or that the public doesn't understand the role of ag, or that maybe there's been a scapegoating of what's been happening in ag. And I think with all of the commitments that companies are making and all of the mobilizing, whether it's the USDA and the way that the government is looking at playing a stronger role in this, it's a great time to be part of this momentum and the movement that we're building. And I think we know that this kind of approach to farming is in all of our best interests. It's all about finding the pathways to make it economically viable and efficient and effective for farmers. And we're excited to be part of that journey.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for sharing insights about your corporations, as well as kind of where you see the markets going in the future and agriculture. I really appreciated Ryan's comments. It's freaking awesome to be in agriculture right now. We can quote that and repeat that here. Thank you all again for attending. If you are, a few notes as we wrap up here. If you are seeking CEUs, ask you to just get your phone ready, because we'll show the QR code in the next slide. And then as everyone leaves today's webinar, a window will open up with a survey. And thank you in advance for taking just 3 minutes to provide us your feedback. We also invite you to visit the websites of any of our presenters today, as well as visit ISAP's website for resources, documents developed through this series, and video recordings of this and past events. Will all be posted at ilsustainableag.org. And if you go there and click on the first slider on the homepage, it will take you to our eco-markets page. And then on Friday, you'll also receive a follow-up email from GoToWebinar with links and summary information. For those seeking CEUs, the QR code is displayed there. Each session has been approved for 1.5 hours, and so you have to do this for each session that you attend by using that. And if you don't have the app, don't worry, there is a link to a form on ISAP's website that will allow you to submit your information, and we will make sure that your number gets submitted to the Agronomy Society for your credits. And the deadline, we just ask you to make sure you submit your request by Friday, July 30th. And then lastly, we will be continuing this conversation on Thursday. So join us as we have our final session looking even further beyond carbon. We will be looking at water quality and other potential revenue streams for ecosystem services, including a presentation from the San County Foundation and their projects connecting farmers with municipalities. RIPE will present on their accounting of all of the ecosystem services generated by well-managed farmland, and then we'll go into the trenches with Jim Whitaker, a farmer who's been playing the carbon market space for multiple years, and he's willing to share some of the lessons he's learned. It should be a great conversation, and I hope you will join us. And look for that email reminder on Thursday morning in your inbox. So thank you again for being part of today's event. I hope you found the information helpful, and I wish you all a safe and pleasant afternoon.